Welcome everybody to the second of our plenary sessions for the conference. My name is Muriel Watt. I'm an advisor to ITP Renewables and to the APVI who's hosting this conference. And I've been working in the renewable sector for over 40 years, so it's always exciting to hear of the new things that are happening. Rachel is the General Manager of Project Delivery at the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, and she's going to talk today about ARENA's low-cost, ultra-low-cost solar research and development program. And there's a lot of people in the audience very excited to hear what ARENA's wanting to do in this space. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. Just after, will my and then my presentation will be put up and I can just ask for the slides to be progressed?
Yes, your presentation is already up.
Perfect. If you just give me a moment. Good morning, everyone. Firstly, I'm so sorry I can't be there today. I feel like there's a great analogy around unpredictable, uncertain times, you know, an impending crisis and technology coming through to the rescue, but can't quite wrap it into a nice, neat little phrase. So I'll leave that with you guys to ponder. Ultra low cost solar is one of ARENA's strategic priorities. What I'd like to tell you or give you some information about today is the context of who ARENA is, how this fits into our priorities, how it enables our other priorities, and our thoughts on how this could be achieved. If we could go to the next slide, please. After seeing the program today, the phrase that kept going through my mind is selling ice to Eskimos. I doubt that there's many people in the room or on the call who haven't either worked with or previously worked with or currently work for. I can see some of my colleagues attending. But for complete clarity's sake, ARENA is the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. We're a federal government agency, and we were established in July 2012. Our focus was on accelerating renewable energy. We're at a place now where, you know, the renewable energy industry is clearly in a commercial phase, and that's allowed ARENA's focus to evolve. So currently our stated mission is to support the transition to net zero emissions by accelerating the pace of pre-commercial innovation to the benefit of Australia. For those of you who've had the good fortune to work with ARENA, you know it's a small organisation. It's about 100 people. We come from really diverse backgrounds, industry where I'm from, finance, research and government sectors. And that diversity allows us to make really great decisions. And we also have a model that's really effective at driving innovation. If we could go to the next slide, please. A little bit more context. When in our mission, we talk about accelerating the pace of pre-commercial innovation, this chart shows the context of where in the innovation chain we really operate. We have a really unique role where we operate from both research and development right up through to deployment. The other things I'd like to point out about this chart is you can see our kind of at the family of organisations in which we operate. So although ARENA will take things from research, create some momentum, get it happening before that pre-commercial stage, we also have other organisations that will take that forward and really drive those projects. The other thing to focus on is our delivery partners and the importance, particularly for this audience, around the importance of universities in that research space. Next slide, please. So another context setting piece. This is a snapshot of ARENA's grants portfolio. And this is where we're currently at. So as many of you will know, we have a requirement with our funding that recipients meet our funding 2 to 1. So we for every dollar that we contribute, we need our recipients to be able to provide an additional $2. That means we've really been able to leverage our grant funding. So from our spend of $1.8 billion, we've been able to be involved with and progress $7.8 billion in total project funding. We've invested in a really wide range of technologies, solar PV, clearly solar thermal, storage, grid integration, bioenergy, hydrogen, and wave power. And solar PV has been a real focus for ARENA ever since the beginning. And to date, we've invested over $700 million in solar PV development and research projects. In 2013, in the year after ARENA's establishment, we committed $20 million of funding to establish ACAP. And since then, which has since then received over $80 million of research funding. So clearly, progressing solar research is something that's been a really strong and long history at ARENA. And not only have we funded programs, but we've also funded individual projects. And while the installation of solar PV is clearly commercial, and we can see that that's a really booming industry at the moment, we still think there's a really critical role for solar PV research to play in achieving our mission. Next slide, please. So moving from who we are to what we're thinking about doing in the future. So as I've mentioned a few times, the variable renewable energy market, it has matured. We've been able to shift our focus from accelerating renewables to accelerating the transition to net zero emissions. And we've identified 4 strategic priorities that we're choosing to focus on. We've picked those because, one, they'll have the most impact in emissions reduction. They'll capitalise on the strengths that ARENA has and our insights into renewable energy, and also that they're relevant to Australia. The first of these is the transition to renewable electricity, and I'll speak to that in the next slide. But I'd also like to touch on the other priorities because it's part of a really important story for ultra low cost solar. Commercialization of clean hydrogen, that's really around bringing the cost to produce, transport, and utilise clean hydrogen, bringing those costs down, make it commercial and feasible. We also see that there's a real opportunity to support the transition to low emissions metals. And that's really about how do we marry the need for heavy industries and hard to abate sectors with variable renewables. And also, we think that's a really great opportunity for Australia because there's a huge demand for green metal. And the last priority is something quite new for ARENA, carbon capture and storage, or carbon capture utilisation storage, and soil carbon measurement. They're new areas, areas where we hope to do some research and gain insight into that. It's a really good fit from the location in the innovation chain, where we're right at that kind of the beginning, the research part. But if we were able to repeat history with what we've been able to do with renewables, with a technology like this, we could really have a big impact on reducing emissions. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So my background is actually as a network engineer. And so integrating renewables into the system is a subject that's really close to my heart. The system and market design assumes that there'll be thermal synchronous generation, and so the increasing amounts of variable renewable energy create challenges, which we're really excited to help facilitate. In terms of integrating large-scale renewable energy, AEMO put out a report, I think it was called Integrating Renewables, about 2 years ago, which really talked about the way that the current grid, the services and the setup that we have, we can facilitate about 70–75% of renewables, but beyond that, there's some really significant hurdles to overcome. And so ARENA's role is to really look at those hurdles and come up with solutions. Energy storage, as we shift from dispatchable thermal generation to variable renewable generation, it's obvious, but unfortunately quite an expensive solution to install storage. So our focus in this space is really reducing costs, but also to look at a broader range of storage so that we have a complete tool chest of options in storage duration. And demand flexibility, again, this is such a passionate project for me, but this is taking kind of the old paradigm of saying we have variable load and we have dispatchable generation, and we will dispatch the generation to meet the demand. Demand flexibility says actually we can invert that, and we can have variable generation, and we can vary our load to meet that demand. What that would enable us to do is avoid having to do energy storage and avoid those costs. We'd be able to run our networks more efficiently and reduce those costs, and also we'd be able to reduce how much variable energy that we would have to curtail or spill. And the fourth theme here is the subject of my talk, which is ultra low cost generation. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Australia could play a really crucial, ARENA could play a really crucial role in helping Australia drive down the cost of generation through the next phase of solar PV innovation. This would be phenomenal because it would allow us to unlock the hydrogen export and green metal opportunities and make those commercial. There's really two benefits here. One is just looking at the economic opportunity. So there is a worldwide demand for hydrogen and for green metals, and we will be able to meet that. The other benefit is being able to reduce emissions from these really hard to abate sectors. So although we have cheap solar PV now, which is really helpful in bringing energy costs down, if we drive those energy costs down to kind of really low levels, it opens up a bunch of opportunities that are now too expensive to really be feasible. When I was a technical engineer, I was told that I could build something fast, I could build it cheap, or I could build it good, but I had to pick two. This is not that case. This is, we're saying we want all three. We want to have our cake and eat it too. So the ambition that ARENA has set for ourselves and for the industry is that we want solar PV to be at 30% of efficiency, 30 cents per installed kilowatt, and we want that to happen by 2030. Now, if we were going to pick just two of those, it would feel quite achievable, but we really have set ourselves a very ambitious target here. It's also related to, but distinct from, the Australian government stated ambition around low cost energy. In November, the Australian government set out its LETS 2020, the low emissions technology statement, and they had a stretch goal for ultra low cost solar at $15 per megawatt hour, looking at the levelized cost of electricity. The difference, I think, there's two major differences between what the Australian government's goal is and what ARENA's goal is. I think firstly, solar 30-30-30 is just a much nicer little tagline. But our 30%, our 30 cent watt installed looks at a narrow scope. So it just covers the cost of installation, equipment, installer cost, and kind of those soft costs. But as I talk further, I will use the levelized cost of energy to speak to it, because it gets a much, gives us a broader concept and drives some really interesting outcomes. And to drill down on that hydrogen opportunity, the government has its H2 under 2, which they're really driving for hydrogen production to be under $2 a kilowatt. And that's really kind of reverse engineering when we put in all those costs around storage, around transport. To make this a good economic opportunity for Australia, we need to drive all those costs down, and that really sets the price that we need for ultra low cost solar. Again, thinking about it in that kind of reverse engineering way, if we want to be cost competitive with low emissions metals, we really do need to have electricity within that really low price range. If we can go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. And this chart really shows us how ambitious our targets are. So it shows us how far we've come, but also how far we still have to go. So ARENA's been involved with many projects that have driven efficiencies. And since 2012, when ARENA started, there's been an 80% reduction in localized cost of energy. But when we look at our target and how far we have to go, we've got another 60 to 70% efficiency increase to achieve the required cost reductions. Next slide, please. Thank you. ARENA could be a catalyst for this innovation. And some of the ways that we think we could help push this forward is by continuing to fund panel efficiency and panel cost research at universities, targeting the specific efficiency goals that we've outlined. We also want to work with the sources of demand. So Suncable would be one of those, to determine what their requirements are and what their barriers are, what's pushing their costs up. And also working with solar PV assembly innovators to accelerate the innovation on deployment efficiency, and potentially through a series of goal innovated challenges. So I think what we're really saying there is no one single solution that is going to get us there, but that we need to, the industry and ARENA in particular, needs to look at the entire chain of what's happening and drive efficiencies through each of those areas. We think Australia is really well positioned to address these innovations. Firstly, because we're a world leader in terms of deployment of solar, and we have some of the world's largest deployment projects. We've also been leading the world for a long time in our research, and particularly UNSW, looking at the panel efficiency and what it's been able to produce there. And then also just our resources. We've got great people, we've got great intellectual property capabilities, as well as, great land opportunities and a really beautiful solar resource. Next slide, please.
3 minutes, Rachel.
Thank you. This slide really illustrates some analysis we've done on what we think our potential path is to achieve the 3030 goal. So just working through these in order of magnitude, we have kind of the module price. We really need to reduce that. We need to increase our plant efficiency. So again, it's not one part of the value chain that will solve this problem. It's everything. Our O&M costs, the cost of looking after the panels and ensuring that they are producing efficiently over their lifetime. That's related to the next point, which is design life. At the moment, we have a kind of an expectation of about 30 years for solar panels, but we need to really push that out. So having that at 40 to 50 years, again, reduce our capital costs and brings that total cost down. So I'm sure I'm speaking to a room of experts who are currently working on or hoping to work on all these problems. So I don't want to tell you how to do your job, but there's some of the opportunities that we've highlighted and some of the things we're looking to see efficiencies in. And each of these paths in isolation is ambitious, but in total, we've really bitten off a lot to chew here. Next slide, please. And what I'd like to finish off is on our next steps. Clearly, ARENA's goal and the government's role is really well aligned. There's been announcements, our own announcement in our investment plan, and then the LET statement that was launched in November. They're both really well aligned on ultra low cost solar as something that we're focused on. ARENA is currently working on developing a funding program that will support the early stage research to improve model efficiency and reduce cost. And we expect to be able to provide further information about funding opportunities early in the new year. So if I could just have the next slide up, please. There is a whole wealth of information that ARENA has on its current and its past projects. So I'll just leave this up to perhaps give you some indications about where you might be able to get some further information.
Okay, thank you very much, Rachel. I'm sure everyone's very interested and going to ask you lots of questions. So are there questions from the floor for Rachel about the new program, about old programs? There's one online which says, in the LCOE potential cost reduction figure, was cost from generator to retailers accounted for?
That's a really interesting question. I think from memory, I don't think it was, and I think there's the other work around kind of integrating renewables and some work that we're being involved with the ESB around market design would likely be the areas where that kind of the market forces and the interactions between generator cost and what consumers pay, or what kind of the price point is at the end. That's where I think that work will be.
Okay. Are there any other questions from people in the live audience?
I'm checking to see if there was somebody in the room. No? Okay, so Rachel, it's Renata here. I understand, I think you hinted at it. Are there plans for another competitive solar R&D round?
I can neither confirm nor deny. What I would say is watch this space, particularly kind of early next year.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Rachel, a more general question then. We've seen costs increase in the supply chain over the last year, I guess due to supply chain issues as much as, you know, all the COVID disruptions. Is there an interest in ARENA about looking at those aspects and where Australia can perhaps do more than it does at the moment in the supply chain?
Yeah, actually, that's been a real topic of interest for me and my team. We're seeing, you know, being on the coalface of watching how projects develop, we're definitely seeing that, you know, the global silicon shortage is pushing solar panel prices up. We're seeing kind of the loose component shortages and that flow through for probably that's impacting at the moment. Where we're seeing that is DER and future fuels, so somewhere where you're building components, kind of building devices from base components. We've been working with, there's an office within the government called the Office of Supply Chain Resilience. And so we've been having some really interesting conversations with them about diversity, about geopolitical alliances. It's something that we've got our eye on, and we're able to provide information to that office kind of straight from our recipients. So we're able to get great information up. We do think about diversity of supply chains when we do funding agreements, and you know, not want to have all of our eggs in one basket, but that's where I kind of feel like the biggest opportunities would be using the levers that we do have to diversify supply chains and making sure that we've got options and that we can drive competitiveness, drive costs down through competition in supply chain diversity.
Okay, thank you. You will have heard Chris Fell this morning talking about a new program that the APVI is establishing on looking at local manufacture. There's another question that's come in. Where does stewardship and recycling fit in, including reports on decommissioning 10 to 20 years into the panel life to take advantage of the greater efficiency of newer panels, and how does that affect talking about?
It's a really complex one. I think for me, this you know, both in solar but also in batteries, I think being really mindful of the resources that we use and whether they are long-term assets or if we're thinking of them in kind of a more disposable manner. It's really important because clearly our mission is around reducing emissions and treading more lightly on the planet than treading heavily. So I think thinking about how we use those resources going forward, I don't believe we have got a consideration of recycling as a formal theme within ARENA, but that might be something that we should really look into. I guess where I think about it in ultra low cost solar is, as I said, driving that design life and making sure that we are improving on the designs, on our previous designs, so that our panels don't last for 20 years or 30 years, that they're able to last 40 or 50 years, so that each time we build something, each time we use our resources, that they're able to provide for a much longer period of time.
Okay, and then make sure they actually stay in place for that amount of time. We're out of time. There's probably more questions there on the floor, but we need to move on to our next presenter. So thank you very much, Rachel. That's very interesting.